We'd like to acknowledge the presence of Dr. Kwame Ampofo, who is a private consultant. He was also the former chairman of the Energy Commission. I believe we'll be able to ask him some questions and get some insight from him as well. Coffee is still available. In case you are still hungry, you can have some coffee even while we go into the next session. I see a lot of movement going on, and we just encourage the media to stay. All right, we'd like to call on Mr. Ben Boache from the Africa Center for Energy Policy to take us into the next session. A round of applause, please.
You may not have a solar panel, but you came here by transport, so you use petroleum. So I expect this conversation to be much more engaging. To do this all-important discussion, I have here, I will call to the table Mr. Francis Perrin, Senior Fellow, OCP Policy Center. Thank you very much for joining us. I have Mr. IMANI who is the Executive Director, Center for Extractive Development. I also have Mr. Pakwesi Anamwasachi, the Executive Director, Institute of Energy Security, to join us. Pakwesi, if you're here, I saw you earlier. Join us. And I have Dr. Ishmael Aka, and I'm excited to see that all the panel members appear. And we have someone from policy perspective to look at the broader policy issues. We have someone from the development side of things to also help us diagnose what we need to do on the continent. We also have somebody from the security side of things to look at energy security relative to oil and gas. And Dr. Aka, who is also with the planning ministry, will help us perhaps deal more with what we need to do as far as planning is concerned. But like I mentioned, hydrocarbon may stay with us for a while as a continent. We are producing so much and consuming very little. The continent has been blessed in recent times with significant discoveries, particularly gas. We're talking about huge gas discoveries in Senegal, Tanzania, and Nigeria. So how can we be part of that, the consumption of these hydrocarbons, and not just be producers and exporters of hydrocarbon? What do we need to do as a continent to ensure that we can increase the penetration of the use of hydrocarbon in our continent? So if I may start with you, Francis, from policy perspective, as African countries, let's look at the country level and even at the regional level. What are the specific policy requirements to ensure that Africa can grow its use of hydrocarbons with a biomass in mind? Because you have, countries still relying significantly on biomass, cutting down trees, when we could use hydrocarbons to provide an alternative energy source for our people. So what can we do from policy standpoint to ensure that we can deepen our use of hydrocarbons?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At the world level, today fossil fuels, oil, gas, and coal, cover about 85% of world primary energy demand. And non-fossil fuels, which means hydro, other renewable energies, and nuclear energy, about 14 to 15%. We are told that, of course, we must, over the next years and decades, try to do what is necessary to increase the share of non-fossil fuels for obvious environmental and climate reasons. We all know this about. As far as Africa is concerned, an increase in oil and gas consumption, including also LPG, liquefied petroleum gas, is important for the region because it could contribute to displace some forms and uses of biomass which may present significant risks for the environment and for the local populations, especially women and children. So it's a paradox of the situation. Less fossil fuels at the world level, at least this is the goal. It does not mean that it will be reached because, as you know, world oil consumption is increasing and world gas consumption is increasing, but it's another issue. But at the African level, especially sub-Saharan Africa, it's important that oil and gas play a significant role in Africa's future energy mix. As of today, Africa accounts for about 4% of world oil consumption and about 4% too of world gas consumption, which is not a great proportion. And you must also take into account that there is a great lot of concentration in this energy consumption. To be more specific, as far as oil is concerned, if you take Egypt, Algeria and South Africa, and you add up the consumption of these three countries, you have a little less than 50% of Africa oil consumption. And as far as gas is concerned, it's even more pronounced because if you take two countries, Egypt and Algeria, you have about 2/3 of Africa gas consumption. There is another issue, and our chairman dealt with this issue in its opening remarks. Africa is very energy rich, including oil and gas. You referred to recent gas discoveries, to recent oil discoveries. We know that on the continent, Uganda will become in the coming years an oil producer and exporter. That Kenya will become an oil producer and exporter. We know that you dealt with this issue, Mr. Chairman, Senegal and Mauritania will become gas producers and exporters of LNG, liquefied natural gas. We know that Tanzania and Mozambique will become gas producers and exporters also in the form of LNG for the most part. And as far as Mozambique is concerned, it will become in the next decade one of the biggest LNG exporters in the world. Not the biggest, because you will have at the head of the competition three countries which are the US, Qatar and Australia. But Mozambique will export huge amounts of LNG in the coming decade. We also have another key issue, which is the wide difference between Africa oil production capacity and Africa refining capacity. As of today, oil production capacity in Africa is about 8 million barrels per day, more or less. It will increase, of course, but these are the figures of today or in the recent years. But at the same time, Africa's refining capacity is about 3.5 million barrels per day. It has two consequences. It means that, of course, Africa has a lot of oil to export. It's, of course, good for the other countries, for the world oil market, to have this source of oil from the African continent. It's, of course, interesting for the countries concerned in terms of oil export revenues and budget revenues. But there is a problem with this issue. It means that African countries, many of them, go on importing significant amounts of refined products in order to meet their own national consumption, even if several of them have very important and sometimes huge oil resources. As far as gas is concerned, Africa is also a net exporting region because gas consumption is very weak. And there is a huge challenge in having some of these national capacities for, capacities for oil and gas to be used first for the benefits of the local population. Here, the refining issue is a key issue. We have to build more refineries in Africa. We have to revamp, to renovate several refineries in Africa in order for the region and the countries concerned to be able to meet local and regional demand. We spoke about Ghana, which has the ambition to become a hub for West Africa. So the country wants to renovate its only refinery, the Tema refinery, and to build in the next years several refineries, of course in order first to meet a growing local consumption, but also to be able to export refined products to West Africa. So the refining issue is a key issue, but we know that economically it's not easy to be profitable in the refining business. It's not the upstream part of the oil business. And here a key issue, Mr. Chairman, is clearly the regional dimension. We have 54 countries in Africa. It's clear that on only a national basis, the private sector will not be attracted in order to build several new refineries in Africa, only on a national basis. With the development and deepening of regional cooperation, of course the refining issue does not become simple, but it does become much less complex, especially in terms of profitability and financing terms. So perhaps on this first speech, I will stay here in order not to take too much time for the other speakers. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I enjoy listening to you, and I wanted you to keep going. Thank you very much. Can we clap for him for his presentation? And very key points that we need to be able to refine what we are producing if we have to use it. Because if you have to ship it out and bring it back, the cost can be a disincentive for extending the use of energy to our people. And the regional dimension also becomes very important. I will skip you, Ima, and go to Pakwasi to tie in the infrastructure demand and what we really need to do at the regional level, at the country level, to ensure that the refining, the storage, and the infrastructure that is required to ensure that we can harness and grow demand for energy can be in place. If you can talk to us from your work and what we need to do as a continent to put in place that infrastructure to help us use energy in the continent.
Thank you very much, Ben, and good afternoon to my senior citizen here. Ben, I'm sure Francis has shed a lot of light on the demand globally and within the regional setup, and so I won't go much deep in there. But then a research done by ExxonMobil recently suggested that oil and gas demand is going to grow by at least 25% going to 2040 thereabout. And that if you look at today, the setup of the fuel mix and which one is consumed the more, you'll find that oil will come first, coal second, gas will come before the rest follow. By 2040, definitely gas is going to overtake coal to become a very dominant fuel, and penetration will be more than 50% increments in consumption. Oil will also grow by more than 20%, all that. So it means that these two products becomes key products for us as a continent, Africa, and knowing very well that we have abundance of these resources. But then how do we get the best out of it? CITAC report. But almost 70% were imported. It means that we are just takers of this fuel. We don't let some go out. And knowing very well that we have very good refinery capacity within the region, if we're going to add Dangote very soon, you'll see that we are going to go into the region of about 2 million barrels a day. This is quite huge, and it could meet our demand. However, the utilization rate is very low for sub-Saharan Africa. And we do between 45 to 58%. So it means that we need to look at, if we want to just get the best use of our own resources, then we need to refine more. And so we should be efficient in our refinery as well. And so that's one key infrastructure that we begin to look at if we have to get energy security. And before I go further, energy security will not be only looking at the supply of the energy at just a fair price. But then for us as producers, we need to sell these products. Energy security also means for us that we are going to have off-takers of our own crude oil. So it is key that we look at this. And for us to get adequate supply of this fuel for our own consumption and also for our off-takers, we need to have adequate infrastructure. I've mentioned the refinery. We look at our pipelines as well for transportation. Within the sub-Saharan Africa setup, it is just the oil that it's more transported by pipeline. For LPG, we have a deficit in its transportation within our corridors. For natural gas, we also have some form of difficulty. And so we need to look at our pipeline. Another infrastructure that's key for our consumption as a region and also for deliveries onto the external market is electricity. You understand that we have deficits in this very area as well. And so to have energy security, you need to have the infrastructure in position and ensure that it will be able to supply us or we're receiving the products and we're also selling the products going forward. That brings to the question of regional integration, and that's where the trend has been. Today, Ghana cannot easily export to Togo, neither can we easily export to Nigeria, except of course we look at ocean. But let me give you a typical example. Supposing we are refining our 10 crude here in Ghana, and Tamari Refinery is doing that. When we are done, because there is regional integration, and if it's working, we'll be able to sell it to Togo. And you know there are tax waivers that could come along the way for them. And so we are going to be more competitive than importing the product from Europe. However, there is no linkage between us and Togo, except by ocean or by truck. From Akosombo, or let me use Adome Bridge, where Boss has a terminal, Mame Water Depot, to Togo, the border, is at 75 kilometers. It means that it's just like from Tema, oil refinery, to Akosombo. We can connect easily, so that when we refine, we feed Togo. Togo will also be able to feed Benin, because the only linkage between Benin and the other countries is like Nigeria and Benin, where Benin feeds them more of their storage from the northern belt. So I think that storage and pipelines are very key for our regional distribution of our products. One other challenge that comes in there will be transportation, but I still come back to electricity. If we have it in abundance, we'll be able to power our own transportation easily by rail and other modes. And so the region, we are good with the oil and gas. We have abundance. We are consuming more as a region, but it's by more of importation. And for us to have energy security, we need to build up our infrastructure well and ensure that we can easily distribute among ourselves, and the leftover we export as well.
Thank you very much, Pakwasi. That is very insightful. The infrastructure is really critical, and we have opportunity to link some of these infrastructure to ensure that we can service the region. Iman, I'll come to you. As a development person, we need to extend the use of hydrocarbon, particularly if you look at the way we are cutting down trees, as cooking fuel across the continent. That is devastating for the environment. And if we have opportunity, for example, with gas, to extend its use to our people, how do we do that? how do we engineer this whole policy discussions and conversation to ensure that we actually achieve results? Because we are told that by 2050, Africa will contribute 50% of population growth in the world. So with this increasing population, are we going to still be using biomass, or we would extend the use of hydrocarbons to reach this population?
Thank you very much, Boachi, and also thanks to IMANI and OCP for inviting us to this rather interesting conversation around the energy issue and integration. You know, when I was trying to just organize my thoughts, I ran into a document that you know, I'd always had, but there was a quote in it that I thought might be interesting, especially since for Ghana and Moroccans, if you're from Morocco, you probably pardon us. We are in a week of celebrating the founder or founders day, sort of not too long ago, and it was a quote about which is compiled by the BBC concerning our ex-president Nkrumah, as he was discussing the Valco and the integrated aluminium project within his development plan. And I found it quite interesting. One professor at Lewis asked him, or said, after he had said many things about how Valco and all the things was going to be integrated and help Ghana to leapfrog and also link to the entire use of natural resources within the African continent. So Professor Atta Lewis said, Mr. President, this is unquote, if all these ideas you articulating are indeed translated into the development plan of Ghana, Ghana will be attempting to walk even before it has learned to crawl. Then President Nkrumah responds, who says Ghana, we want to walk? Ghana is going to fly. And as I came in, I was listening to Bento and some of the discussions. Then I asked myself, I said, well, Imani, I don't know, Franklin and the team, my question is, what makes you think that some of our current leaders now are thinking about flying? In fact, a lot of them are still stuck in the chlorine mode, or even some don't even want to walk. Because the truth of the matter is that when you look at the plans, even for Ghana, and the AU has done a lot of work on this subject matter. The question is, why are we stuck? And that's where I found this quote interesting. That a lot of our leaders are not really interested in the flying discussion. They are really stuck in wanting to just sit where they are in their small enclaves. We wake up, and every morning what we do is our leaders insult each other. And whilst people are thinking, you know, what we do is spend our time, that either we steal the little money that is there, and I'll show you why it's so, or we rather spend money on people to insult other people. So that's why we are where we are. Because, you see, and I'm saying this because there is an example, and as Frank said, if you look at in terms of how do you really deal with this, we started for a very long time. If you look at in North Africa, especially countries like Algeria and Egypt, Egypt built the pipelines and they export gas to Lebanon, Israel, and so on for a very long time. But I'm interested more in Algeria because the Algerian story, it's quite similar to some of the challenges we face now at the time they did it. And this is way back 70s, by the way. When they decided that they had found enough gas and they were going to not just consume it locally, but also try to tap into the European market. And so when you look at one of the projects that the Algerians did, and a lot of studies have been conducted around this in terms of the lessons that this gives for us. And the other lesson for me will be our attempt to do a similar thing with the West African gas pipeline. Why have we not succeeded? What the Algerians did is that, and because we don't have a lot of time, I think the lesson there for me is the political context and the role of government. I know that a lot of people will shrink, and especially the IMANI team, when I say the role of government. But you see, when I was sitting through the financing discussion that just took place, and like it or not, where the continent is at the moment, we will need a thinking and a very careful government role to be able to solve this problem. Why? Because in the case of the Algerian, it was a very deliberate attempt. The Italians needed the gas, and they wanted to position themselves with Europe at a particular time to be able to ensure that they were gas sufficient. And the Algerians were smart enough to realize that we didn't have the resource, the money, but we had the resource, and we needed somebody to invest. And so they came into an arrangement that allowed the Italians, interestingly, using ENI, which was the national oil company, to orchestrate a process where the government provided the requisite guarantees for ENI to mobilize all the companies that he needed to mobilize for the gas pipeline to be built, so that gas could be transported from Algeria through Tunisia to Italy. But the Algerian government did not just sit aloof. They were very strategic in ensuring that they will be able to make sure that they also supply some of the gas to meet their domestic needs. So trying to sort of kill two birds with one stone, meeting their domestic need at the same time tapping into not just the African market, but also the European market. It's interesting that when you read around this, you see that the Nigerians tried to do the same thing recently, not too long ago, where there was some conversation of getting Nigeria gas to go all the way through Algeria. But the sad thing about the Africa story is that since that idea was mooted a couple of years ago, that Nigerian pipeline has still not been built. The one we have tried to build is the West Africa gas pipeline. But we all know the story about the West Africa gas pipeline. The pipeline has been constructed. The government, you say that the political will was there because the president signed and so on. So the point I'm trying to make with all this is that the context has changed. Right now, and I was listening to carefully, we still have, take or pay contract that we sign, but there are a lot of private players now in the industry. So the companies are not necessarily interested in your national energy security per se. They are more interested in their commercial interest. It is the government who is interested in a national energy security. And so our policy, the way we frame our policy and the way we implement it is very, very important. When I listened to the earlier conversation, I asked myself, I said, okay, so if we in the 60s, 70s build schools, and go check, by the way, most of the schools that were built in the 60s, 70s, all of them had underground tanks for water storage. Most of them. Most of them had, and this was 1960s. But in 2018, we are constructing schools in places where the water company has not laid pipelines, and nobody thinks about putting water tanks there. So we finish, and then now we say there's the school, but there's no water. That's where I'm coming from with this quote from the thinking, the thinking point. So the point I want to make is that there are a lot of challenges, but I see a lot more opportunities than challenges. If we have excess capacity, and talk to a lot of private sector people in Ghana, until the recent dollar issue, the number one challenge will be energy. And yet, we say we have excess energy capacity. We can't utilize it. And the private sector people are saying we cannot afford the energy that we have. So I think it's really about, the issue about Africa is that our leaders, when it comes to the energy situation, like many other things, are thinking more about how much revenue this is going to generate in the short term for us. So it's more about export. They are more export oriented in their thinking and getting the immediate return than to do the hard work of putting in place the infrastructure and having the patience to making sure that we can provide this energy source for a lot of our people.
I will come back to you for us to try and hack this crawling business. I mean, it's a real problem, and I can see even from what is happening in Ghana and attest to that. I mean, from the Algerian example where they linked local consumption with export, which was really significant, ensuring that there was a local use of their gas. And compare that to what is happening in Ghana. It was a fantastic idea to produce our gas and ship it onshore so that we can consume the gas locally. But look at what has happened. You have ENI and its partners investing $7 billion to build all the infrastructure offshore. And our preparation to just build a pipeline to consume the gas, we have been sleeping over it. And now we have the gas delivered and nothing ready to consume the gas. You know, so it comes back to the same point about leadership and how we crawl in ensuring that we walk the talk. But I'll go to Ishmael and I'll come back for a deeper conversation on this. Ishmael, from planning perspective, you are the man in charge of planning. So let us know, from planning perspective, what can we correct to ensure that the issues that have been mentioned, the infrastructure that we need to build, and even maintaining the infrastructure and its use. We are told that the 600-kilometer pipeline that was built between Ghana and Nigeria is almost redundant. What are the political hurdles that we need to scale to ensure that the plan can be rolled out and implemented as efficient as was thought through? And also link that to the region as a whole. Do we still have potential to extend the pipelines? For example, we have gas coming up, more gas coming up in Senegal. Can that also be fed into the regional arrangement for us to consume? Or that could also become another white elephant? What do we need to do from planning perspective?
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Imani. I think since I retired, this is the first time I've gotten an opportunity like this to speak. Okay, so this is a very interesting topic. We look at oil and gas in terms of production. Africa is contributing about 7.5% of global production, but consuming less than 5%, as the first speaker said. Now, before I even come to, or before I start, I think that we have to make a choice. And when you make that choice, you decide to put in measures to achieve that choice. We have the potential, oil and gas resources. First, do we produce the oil and gas, export, get the money, and use the money to do investment, as most countries are doing? Or do we refine the oil and gas here and export the product, the finished product, so that at least we create jobs, we add value and all those ones? Or we refine locally and we use the oil and gas for our power and other local consumption. So these are three choices. Now all these choices have consequences. So first, yes, we have the potential which we've identified. Then we have to make a choice. Export, refine and export, or refine and use locally. But all these have consequences. First, whatever we're going to take will depend on the nature of contract we even sign. So if you sign a contract that I'm going to produce gas locally, but the nature of the contract is such a way that the gas I'm going to export from another country will be cheaper than the gas I'm going to produce locally, then it doesn't make economic sense to refine and use it locally. That's the first one. Then there's also the issue of infrastructure, the pipelines. I mean, gas pipelines normally thrive on long-term contracts and demand. So first we have to establish the fact that yes, there's demand, and two, we sign the contract. But the signing of the contract and the building of the infrastructure is one thing. The contract, the pipeline is going to deliver natural gas, which should be paid for. So when you take the West African gas pipeline, there are two issues we are dealing with. Yes, Nigeria has not been maybe reliable, first because they also have their local demand to meet. But Ghana has also not been reliable in terms of paying for the gas we get. So we cannot blame, for instance, Nigeria. We have to look at the fact that gas is not free and we have to pay for. So it requires a lot of money to invest in pipelines, to invest in regasification projects and all that. But first there should be demand and we should be prepared to pay for the gas we receive. Then there's also the issue of self-discipline. I mean, toll was not like this in the 70s, in the 80s. We had a plant, refining, breaking even, making profit. By the time came, the government can order a power company, a government power company, to go to toll, take oil, we'll pay. The power company will produce the power. Another government company will take the power, sell it. Will not pay the power producer will not pay toll, and will become a government affairs. So by 2010, 2003, 2004, the debt was so much to the extent that we had to introduce a recovery levy to pay for all these debt. So if we are not seeing power as an economic good which we should consume and pay, then some of these issues we can build the infrastructure, we can look for the funding and all that. But we will not be able to pay the investment. Then we should also look at the tariff system. Look at our system in Africa, where in Ghana, for instance, the residential sector is paying less than the industrial sector. We are taking our power tariff system from the structural adjustment program, where power is seen as a social good, a poverty alleviation tool. And for that matter, if we're able to give 50 kilowatt per hour to somebody, we count it at access. So you go to Ghana is 85%. You go here, it is maybe that person, that household is just consuming 50 kilowatt per hour. Now that 50 kilowatt per hour, which may be the average, annual average, is the total consumption of a US citizen for just 33 hours. Now what can that do? So we have to also look at a tariff system that encourages the use of power for productive purposes. When industry uses power because they are using it to generate income, they're able to pay. And they can pay the tariff and all those things, and this can also encourage investment. So for me, I think that, yes, let's make a choice. See power as an economic good. And if we are making a choice to refine and use our oil and gas locally, then we should put in the measures. For instance, my brother spoke about the regional integration, which is also very good. Unfortunately, at times, how we understand the regional integration is that let's have a West African power pool, let's have the East African power pool, then we consume from a producer. No. The power pool should be in such a way that we can also collectively invest. So Ghana, Nigeria can invest in a pipeline, Ghana, Liberia can invest in a gas project. Now when it comes, unfortunately, one of the indicators or one of the very good factors to ensure a successful power pool is unbundling the distribution and the generation bit. Most of the Francophone countries are not unbundling. So you go to Cote d'Ivoire, there's one company from generation through transmission to distribution. How do we make this successful so that at least we can be on a level playing field? So there's a lot to do at the regional level. We have the target, AU Agenda 2063, the Africa Power Vision and all those things, but there's more to be done. Less talking and more action and attention.
Thank you very much, Ishmael. And can we give a clap offering to all of them? And I will come back to my panel, but I want to also hear from you. And not just questions, because I know there are experts amongst you. I want to understand, with your policy hat on, what do we need to do, those of you coming from a village like myself, to send LPG to that village to ensure that they can transition from wood fuel to hydrocarbons, which has been established here that we have abundance of. So let's just get into that conversation to give us practical thoughts about what you think can be done to deepen the use of hydrocarbons as alternative to wood fuel, so that we can engage at that level of policy to say that this is what the practical solutions and this is what the public is also prescribing for us to be able to solve our problems as far as use of hydrocarbon is concerned. So Stephen will help me to, if you raise your hand, we'll come to you and you can contribute or ask a question. So I have 5 minutes, and I have 5 minutes to do this. And please be snappy, very concise and straight to the point. I can take 5 people. So I have 1 at the back, and Nana is here, 2, and I have 3. And who else? The 2 of you combine your thoughts. And I'll pick yours from that side.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just quickly then, we've spoken a lot about, sorry, my name is Martin Hiles. I've been in distribution of all sorts of things in West Africa for 25 years. We've spoken a lot about increasing production and creating new demand for power and how we can finance it. We haven't spoken about how to save what we've already got. We don't pay for electricity. The collapse, or one of the biggest problems with VRA is that people haven't been paying for electricity, whether they're state institutions or private individuals that steal from ECG. We have the premix fuel system, which doesn't get down, costs Ghana $55 million a year. It doesn't get to the fishermen. Some does, but not a lot. These are where we can actually save money by paying for what we use. Let's not steal it. Let's use what we've got efficiently. And we've already seen the success of going from incandescent bulbs to other bulbs. Let's continue with saving what we've got before we plan on new, which we've heard a lot about today is quite difficult. Yeah. Also in transport, the cheapest way to transport anything liquid, that is by pipeline, then by water, then by rail, then by road. Ghana has a pipeline from the coast to the Burkinabe border. It was given to Ghana, the northern section, in 2008 and has never been used. We have a pipeline from the coast to the Volta Lake. It was broken, coincidentally, in 2008. It has 6 pinpoint breakages in it where it was drilled into.
Yes, I like that point, that we should save what we have, and that is quite significant for me. In Ghana, when you pump petrol from Tema to Akosombo, it will not get there, but if you pump water, it will go. You know, so we have to think about that and save what we have, ensure that we are not stealing it. Can we get another point?
Ben, what are you doing next?
Nana was next.
Nana was next?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I've been observing things, but it looks like the members of the National Planning Committee have not been here. I don't know how such discussions are communicated to them. I think in the very near future, I would suggest that those who plan for this country must be key players in some of these programs. Then to add to infrastructural development towards the application use of these things, I think education counts a lot. At what level of our educational system do we make these policies, programs, and technicalities known to the ordinary Ghanaian? Because me, as a village chief, if I want to go to my place and implement renewable energy for my people, how do I go about it? What I'm seeing here is that when we talk of IPP, we are thinking of big, giant companies that will handle monies, some coming from IFCs and the rest. But a small village with about 1,000 citizens, how do we go about it? How do we learn? How do we educate the people? I think these are areas I wish you take a look at.
Well, I'm really enjoying the contributions that are coming in. Educating our people to understand, not just thinking about the policy, but how do people get to know what policy is in place, what is it about renewable or petroleum we are talking about. So who was the third? So the two people that have combined their thoughts. And
yes, my question is in relation to uptake of LPG for cooking. Right, there's been a lot of research trying to find out what drives people to actually accept and use LPG for cooking purposes. And the challenge is that obviously from the literature, the so-called the income hypothesis, where you think that when people become rich, then they tend to move away from the wood fuels to clean fuels such as LPG and electricity. Well, I consider most of us here to be in that bracket. Can you ask yourself whether you still use charcoal or not? If you still use charcoal at home for specific purposes, why is that the case? And then we can think about the people in the rural areas. How do we get people in the rural areas to move from charcoal firewood to LPG for cooking? We know the health benefits for doing that. We know the employment benefit for doing that, because you don't get too much tired using the charcoal or going to fetch firewood and all that you can use the time for productive purposes. What policy can be implemented to move people from such to LPG? Given that you want to use LPG, it comes with a lot of equipment that should be consistent with the use of the LPG. It's not just the canisters. So even if you subsidize the fuel itself, how are they going to get the stoves and others requirements that are necessary for the uptake of the LPG? So the policy have to go beyond subsidy.
That was a combined thought?
Yeah.
Okay.
the combined question and thought. So can we pick, yes.
My name is Michael Bozombo Petrusol. I think what we have to understand is this. There seems to be a disconnect between the policymakers and the private sector. And if we can fix this, because we tend to think that some of these issues are so grandiose, so big, they are unachievable. But to us in the private sector, they don't mean anything. But policymakers don't seem to have confidence in the private sector, especially the indigenous private sector. If you take the oil and gas sector, the moment Tor went into financial difficulties, it had to take indigenous players to step in to save this country from crisis. In fact, some years ago, certain villages did not have filling stations. It had to take indigenous Ghanaian private people. You hardly hear of, some communities not having fuel stations. It didn't take foreign money. It took indigenous people to save. So let's believe in the Ghanaian expertise, and some of these problems we can address them internally. Thank you.
So I'll come back to the panel to wrap up for me. Let us now come to the solutions. How do we ensure? We have talked about infrastructure. We've talked about the fact that we have the volumes, we have the hydrocarbons. What practically do we need to do? Maybe one solution that can really be helpful for us to ensure that we are not only producing to export, but we are actually engaged in the consumption of hydrocarbons. So I'll start with you, Francis, and you wrap up with your final thoughts and then.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Some key issues, it will not be exhaustive, of course, because of time, and the other speakers will go back on this. Oil products prices and the issue of subsidies. We know that there is a significant gap on the African continent in terms of refining capacity. And of course, some of the difficulties in the refining sector are directly linked to this key issue of oil product prices, which are heavily subsidized, and which of course has an impact on the profitability of some of the refining projects which have been considered for sometimes a very long time. Another key issue is gas flaring. We repeatedly said, and it's true, Africa is energy rich. Renewables, oil, gas, hydro, etc. As far as gas is concerned, we have yet a lot of gas being flared. When you have fields which produce both oil and gas, and you do not have an interesting market for gas, the oil companies will produce oil and flare gas, which is of course a huge issue. It's a very important economic loss. It's a contribution to atmospheric pollution. It's a contribution, of course, to climate change through methane, which is the main component of natural gas. We also have the issue of regional cooperation we dealt with, so just to put it on the table at the end of this session. And we also have 3 key issues. You need a mid-term and long-term political and economic vision. Otherwise, you will never be able in the energy field to do something which is significant. It's not a short-term sector, energy, certainly not, due to the weight of investment and the delays. Construction and operation delays. You also need a very strong and lasting political willingness. Strong and lasting. Not strong and not lasting. Of course, it will not be enough. And you also need trust. And sometimes in some regions which are very energy rich, you have more energy resources than trust, which is a problem. Energy is strategic, highly strategic. It has been said since the beginning of our seminar. And when something is strategic, it means that if you do not trust other countries, you will not cooperate with them because it's too important. And so energy cooperation, energy integration goes back to some basic political issues, including trust at a regional, sub-regional, and continental level. Thank you.
I think a lot of the solutions have been professed already, and so I'll just reiterate them and to say that yes, the point about the policy disconnect is a very key one. But my view is that there is a reason also for that. And part of the challenge we have, and I guess maybe as Frank already said, we are dealing with a sector that you cannot afford to be doing short-term thinking. It has to be long-term. But here we have a situation where our political leadership, unfortunately, the system we are at doesn't allow them to do long-term thinking. They do short-term, 4-year thinking. And so that's also partly the problem. So they are motivated about what will 2020 count for me. But that's not how you are going to achieve the objectives we are talking about here in the oil and gas sector. It's more, they are more beyond 4 years. And so that's something we need to find a way around. In addition to that, I think since Kofi said, we have a lot of policies and legal infrastructure, I leave that. But there are market issues. The markets are different between the matured markets and then the immature markets that we particularly find ourselves in Africa. There are also issues about the power sector policies themselves, a lot of inconsistencies, and I think Ishmael mentioned some of them if you compare the different countries. Then you're also financing cross-border projects have their own complexities because you've got to deal with different laws, regulations, supplier transit issues, and all those kinds of things, different conditions for off-takers and all those kinds of things. How do you deal with that? There are also issues about vulnerability because of particularly the geopolitical context within Africa, where there are conflicts in other countries and all those kinds of things. So it's about really thinking. But unfortunately, I have to say this is an energy discussion, but I think that a lot of the problems, which energy is one that we are faced with at the moment, we have to rethink the political structure that we have. It is not allowing the political leadership to think and to think long term. So that is what is creating a lot of the problems that we are having. It's not just a problem with Ghana, by the way. It's a problem even as we democratize. We are democratizing and we have a system where the leadership is thinking only the next election. It is the citizens who are thinking medium to long term. But the leadership is thinking 4 years. And so they can't think and plan very well. And until we unravel that, we will be going, unfortunately, in these circles.
All right, Ben, I will push for the regional integration and so that we can reinforce our infrastructure base and ensure that we have adequate supply within our own region before we look outside. It's important that we go back to the table. I am sure on regional base, we've done a lot of discussion among ourselves. My senior mentioned the pipeline that lies at Bope to Bogatanga, lying fallow for years. There was a discussion between the Burkinabés and Ghanaians somewhere in 2017 thereabouts. That's why they constructed the pipeline from Bope to Bogatanga, and there's a depot. For over 4 years, it's not being used. Over more than, let's say 2 years, it's not being used. It's supposed to be connected to Ouagadougou at Ouaga. They've not initiated that very activity. I think we need to look at it. We also need to look at our strength as countries around the region. If you look at Togo, they might not produce oil, but they offer the best place for vessels to berth. Quite a security for them at the Lomé Triangle. It is safe. If this is their strength, on regional base, we know that all our vessels, the bulky ones, are coming to berth here. When we go to Nigeria, we can speak of their refineries set up as well, while Dangote is coming on stream. We shouldn't rush as a country here to even build extra refineries, because what Dangote is going to do in the next few years, the capacity of Nigeria alone is more than 1.1 million barrels per day. So let's look at our strength. When it comes to Ghana, we have enough storage such that we cannot even turn it over quickly. It's at a cost. Mami Water Depot by Adome Bridge has been sitting there for more than 6 years, not being used. Accra Plains Depot is not being used efficiently. So let's look at our strength and say Nigeria refines more, we can store more. Togo presents a security zone for us as a region. Then we can create the hub that we see in Arab, Antwerp, and Rotterdam.
Okay, thank you. So Ishmael, your final thoughts.
Thank you very much. So, well, I believe that energy access should be a priority for African government. I mean, energy promotes development, energy leads to so many other things to open the sector. Most governments, when you look at how they spend their oil revenues, like Ghana, Nigeria, they have priority areas, and energy access can be one, and they can invest. And for instance, they can also channel their natural gas into that. Another thing too is that I would differ a little bit from what Uncle Ima said, that we are thinking, in fact, in 1995, we did the Vision 2020. We projected that by 2020, we're going to have 10% renewable energy access in our mix. In 2006, we did the SNAP document, Energy Commission, 10% renewable energy. AU Agenda 2063, we are thinking, the weakness is that our thinking is normally not backed by a very competent economic analysis. So let's call it wishful thinking. So you don't do the analysis, that's one. And another weakness is that we don't act. So yes, we have all the documents, we have all the dreams, we have all the visions, but we don't push forward. As Ben said, we knew that ENI was going to produce gas. Even the major infrastructure, they are doing it. When we started talking about reverse flow, I think I was in JSS 1 or so. And we are still talking and thinking about reverse flow. So yes, we are thinking, but we are not acting. The final one is that I think we should also be looking at creating what we call prosumers, making the consumers also invest in energy. Elsewhere, they have net meters. In Africa, it is estimated that our consumers spend about $6.5 billion on inefficient lighting systems. How do we have net meters? So at the excess energy they consume, they can even sell it to the grid or to the power consumer. That will even create efficiency. So that I know that, yes, I have 100. When I consume 50, I can give the other 50 to ECG and get money. People will not consume more. Can we do that? The last one is, again, the off-grid solution. We cannot have all our systems on the grid. It's very expensive. So some of the places, energy access, can we look at off-grid solutions, efficient and competent ones, so that we can deal with some of our challenges? Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. Can we give a round of applause to my panelists? I think we don't have the time to exhaust all the issues, but what we have is quite significant for us to understand that as a continent we have the resources. We are into the future going to produce more oil, more gas. That presents an opportunity for us to be part of the consumption and not just export for the sake of revenue, which we have done for so long. Policy needs to be in place to ensure that we are also extending the use of hydrocarbon. And also we are not just thinking, but thinking deeper enough to be able to ensure that that thought process is also backed by action, which is often lacking. And let us also allow the next political party to come and also continue. We can't think for the rest of the country in 4 years. So think what is feasible, think what you can do, and what is important to deliver within a short to medium term, and then allow a proper plan to continue with other elected bodies also continue with the development. And that's a problem. So you are elected for 4 years, and you are spending time to clean the waste of one, and you are creating more waste. So that has been a problem, because you come in and there is waste for you to clear, and you're also creating more waste. So we don't have time to really do what is needful for our people within the short space of 4 years that we have. So planning is very important. At a regional level, planning infrastructure, it has to be a well thought through process. If you build a pipeline, can we limit the politics so that the private sector can take over and run it more efficiently? I'm sure if we had handed the pipeline to the private sector to deal with it, run it to Burkina, they would be doing it by now. But because government is deeply involved, they don't care whether it rusts or not, and it's not going to happen because somebody is also making money, cutting it by road, and that is where his benefits are. And I think if we can limit the politics and just come out clearly that it's a real challenge for us as a continent. And the planning regionally is also something we have to address and work on. You have Ghana saying it wants to be a hub for the West Africa region, and Nigeria is investing billions developing the same infrastructure. And you have Senegal now with significant volumes of gas so close to Europe saying that they also want to be the gas hub. So who is planning, really? Because you cannot sit here and plan to use your hub to serve anybody when they are also building their own infrastructure. And I think that level of thinking and looking at what others are doing is quite important for us to be able to draw the synergies and see who can better do what. So that as a continent we are developing. Because if you build the infrastructure, it's no use, it's debt on your people. And we would have to pay ultimately. And I see that happening. When the power problems in Ghana, was at its peak, you heard politicians saying we are going to export power to Benin, we are exporting power to Togo, we are exporting power to Cote d'Ivoire. At the same time, Benin also commissioned the construction of a power plant to say that Ghana has problems, so we want to build power plant to go and help them. So we are not planning, we are not thinking through our issues as a continent or as a region. And that is where we need to go. We need a stronger bodies, regional and sub-regional bodies, to think through some of the integration processes so that the isolation can be limited, to ensure that we have a coherent plan. And I'm so grateful to you all for your audience and my panelists who have been extremely fantastic in dealing with the issue. So thank you very much for being with us throughout this session.